She wanted to buy a gun. Some of you know her. She's a child of the area. Maybe you grew up with her. For some, she's now a beloved colleague, mentor, teacher. And for whatever reason, she decided one day to exercise her rights as an American citizen. She wanted to buy a gun. The day at the store seemed like just another day. The staff was kind and helpful. The mood was jovial. There was a good crowd shopping. She had her husband with her and a good friend and, of course, her beautiful little porcelain-skinned daughter. And after shopping and comparing and asking some questions, she made a choice. And then came the paperwork. It is a gun, after all, not a box of Cheerios. And as she was filling out the paperwork, there came a section that she has always hated in these kinds of forms. You see, Megan has a white mom and a black dad. And this was a section of the form asking her to choose. Are you white? Are you black? But she had made a decision long ago that she would never ever deny her white family, that she would never ever deny her black family. They were all her family. And so she checked both boxes. And the clerk took the paper and he started going over it. And then maybe because, this paperwork is so important, he took the paper to another staff member to double check it. And the other man, the fellow checking the paper for a second time, said quite audibly, "You know she checked both white and black, right?" And from that moment on, the entire experience changed. This man who had been so helpful was suddenly a different person. His responses to her questions became short and rude. He glared at her. He wouldn't stop staring at her. And then his mission became to follow her all around the store, even as she no longer needed help, even as there were many other people in the store who probably would have benefited from a staff member coming over and saying, "Hey, do you have a question?" But of course, those folks were white. And Megan had identified herself as a person of color. Our country is in the midst of a horrible time of stress, pandemic, economic uncertainty, fear, hardship, and now civil unrest caused by an action so unspeakable and so in your face that most of us cannot fathom how such a thing could ever have been allowed to happen, except we've seen it before. Again and again, it's like a horrible sequel, another horrible sequel to a terrible movie, except it's real. I'm going to say up front, our congregation has law enforcement officers in it. Some are active, some are retired. They do a job that can become terrifying and deadly. And they are the best. If I could form a committee of individuals to reform and fix this part of the problem, every single one of them would be on it. But if I could today, even as I am not expert, and even as I cannot speak perfectly to this and can only speak as the person I am, I'd like to try to go a little deeper to the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem that allows the system to make the reality we now share a never-ending reality. And please, as I do this, hang in there with me. I know there are times at church when you want to turn the pastor off. Please don't do it here. Many of you have heard me speak before about privilege. The privilege those who are white have in this society. And a lot of us white folk don't like that word. I've had to work for everything, we say. I've been through terrible times. No one gave me squat, except we don't usually use the word squat. But having privilege, it doesn't mean that you never had it hard. It doesn't mean that you haven't had to work your tail off. It doesn't mean that there may have been times in your life, maybe right now, when you didn't have a thing in the bank. When I was a kid, I loved to play quarterback. And I had that knack, that knack of reading a defense and throwing that ball in such a way that it hit the receiver on stride. But of course, everybody started growing, except me. And then our little elementary school, where I was always a pickup game quarterback, merged with all the other schools, and even the football got bigger. And there were kids around now who also liked to play quarterback. And they could hit a receiver on stride. And instead of having smaller hands like me, their hands could really grip that bigger ball. Instead of being short like me, they were taller and they could see over the ever-growing kids playing on the line. They even sometimes had last names that had been around the area for a long time. Names revered on the local sports scene. And when the question was asked, who's going to be a quarterback on this next level? My name was not lifted up. They had the advantage. They hadn't earned it, but they had it. That's what privilege is. An advantage. I've worked terrible jobs. Jobs where I had to undress at the back door, walk into the shower, blow my nose to get the dust, grime, and muck of the day out. One summer in grad school, I had a food budget, $12 a week, and I did not have a kitchen. I get it when a white person says, I've had it really hard. I totally get that I still had it way easier than a lot of white people. But when I showered and I put on a suit and I went into an interview, I had an advantage. When I was lost on a trip before GPS and I had to ask a stranger for help, I had an advantage. When I was pulled over by a cop when I was 17 years old, and he said to me, I know you think I'm some kind of pig, and I got mad and I started yelling at him and waving my finger at him and telling him that I respected his position and that he had no right to make such an inference. And as he started backing away saying, easy buddy, easy, misunderstanding, I had an advantage. It wasn't an advantage I earned. It was just given to me. And that's why it's called privilege. And it's a privilege people in this country who have white skin possess. It doesn't make life suddenly perfect. It doesn't mean things will always be easy. It doesn't make you rich. It doesn't mean you won't end up poor. Every life has pain, but it's still an advantage. And a lot of the path to healing in this country has to come with the realization that this privilege has to end. And it will only end when we all stand together and say it has to end. The word privilege has something in common with another phrase we are hearing a lot these days. And it is a phrase a lot of white folks really hate and hate hearing. The phrase is Black Lives Matter. And I do think that a lot of this is based on a pretty simple misunderstanding and again. Please hang with me. As Christians, we constantly talk about the love of Christ being for all people. We shudder at any statement that might be interpreted as lifting one people or one kind of people up above others. And if we're following Jesus, that includes any statement that would seem to lift Christians over others. But have you seen in professional sports when teams put a pink ribbon on their uniforms to raise awareness for breast cancer, to support research of that disease, to embrace its victims? Do any of us think, as we see that, cheer that, even perhaps write a check in supporting funding for finding a cure for that disease, that this somehow is saying other kinds of cancer are not important? I don't think so. I don't think so. All lives matter. We know that. And maybe we white folks weren't listening. Maybe the marketing surrounding the phrase could have been better in the beginning. But the phrase Black Lives Matter in no way is meant to contradict the ultimate truth that humanity is really one race and should act as one human family. It just means that Black lives also matter. And we need to break down the walls and advantages created by distrust and hate and privilege. We need to realize that the lived reality of Black people in this society is that they are often made to feel that their lives do not matter, that they should fear for their lives, that they are somehow disposable. Racism needs to be swept from our hearts and our institutions. And it's gonna be a lot of work. Those of us who are older are looking at the protests going on in our nation right now and remembering the protests of the 60s. We shudder at the violence from both sides of the street. Some from both sides of the street have taken things too far, and some unfortunately continue to do so. We all understand that a better path needs to be taken, but we are seeing that path being taken by literally thousands. And we're understanding more clearly that outside forces acting selfishly have often been getting in the way of peaceful demonstration. We are seeing in these protests some beautiful moments on all sides, and a beautiful call for fairness, equity, and unity. But it's going to be hard work, and we're going to need to do it together. You know, this is different, I think, from the 60s. You look at those crowds of mostly younger people and you see every race represented. I know that happened in the 60s too, but I don't think on this scale. There is a real acknowledgement that this is a task we have to share. There's not going to be complete agreement on everything. There never is, there never will be. And by the way, one way racism often works is when the majority looks down on the minority for not being in complete agreement on what specifics they want. No one ever expects the majority to agree on everything. But what is happening is, in a lot of ways, beautiful. Even as, it's scary. And I'm watching our own young people from this congregation display their passion for justice and for equity, and I have to say, I'm really proud. And they deserve to know that while none of us agree on everything, we are with them on the big thing, because God's word speaks the big truth, that we are one race, one human family under God. And life needs to reflect that. And life needs to reflect that. Institutions and hearts have to change. Because there's a reason why the net worth of white families in America is about 10 times, on average, that of black families. A reason why the income of white families is about $30,000 a year more than that of black families. A reason why the poverty rate for black families is more than double that of white families. A reason why I, at 17 years old, could have a confrontation with a police officer and drive away, while two of my good friends who decided to drive from Jersey to visit us at Penn State got pulled over on the way, had to watch their car torn apart and searched, had to sit on the side of the road for 2 hours as police cars assembled, never getting an explanation about any of it until they were finally allowed to drive away. It's the same reason why Megan got mistreated and followed in the gun shop. The same reason why, as a little girl, she was ostracized if she had cornrows in her hair. Why the older kids would come over and say to her classmates, "Don't play with the black kid." Why even today she gets told, "Gee, you don't act black." Seriously? There's a reason. And things have to change. And while hearts take a while to change, the things we can do institutionally can be changed much more quickly. There was a Bible reading for this week. It goes like this. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There are a lot of hurting spirits out there right now. Spirits that long to be recognized as brothers and sisters, and spirits that realize their privilege and want the day of equity and unity to come. There's a lot of mourning out there. Christ calls us to turn mourning into dancing, and as he was the change this world needed, even as that carried him to a cross, he calls us to be the change. May we all heed that call. Peace.